In today's video, I'm sharing 20 more brands to thrift and sell online. So I made a video a little over a year ago sharing 20 brands to thrift and sell online. And I wanted to do kind of a follow-up or a part two and share some more brands in that same kind of a layout format. So today I'm going to share 20 brands that typically either have a low turnaround time of less than 90 days or a high turnaround of more than 90 days, and then brands that typically have a low average sales price of under $30 or a high average sales price of more than $30. So this is just based on my own data from my own sales. This isn't like concrete. I did take a look specifically within the last 2 years of brands that sell, within these criterias, just because I feel like things change so much so quickly with reselling that I don't want to be sharing data from like 4 years ago. So this is all relatively recent within the last 2 years, and hopefully you find this video helpful. So the first section on this matrix is going to be items that typically have a low sales price of less than $30 and a high turnaround time of more than 90 days. So they are items that do take a little while to sell and they don't sell for a lot, but again, all 20 of these brands that I'm going to share have sold well for me. So even though this first one is going to be kind of the worst of them, where it sells for the least amount, it takes the longest to sell, it does at least sell. So there's that. All right, so the first brand is Wild Fox, and this is a brand that I come across every so often, not super frequently, but their crew necks can do pretty well on the resale market. I know they retail typically around $100, and they definitely do not resell close to that. They typically will flip under $30, but it is a brand that when I do list an item by that brand, I do know that eventually it will sell and will leave me with, somewhat of a profit, especially if I'm picking it up at the bins for a couple dollars. And even if it does sell 15, 20, 25, it's still worth it for me to pick up, and I do know that eventually it will sell. But it's a brand that I wouldn't pick up anything by. I would kind of make sure it's in very good condition, a good style, things like that. Next up is Urban Outfitters, and this includes in-house brands like BDG and Cooperative. Typically, Urban Outfitters does flip somewhere between $15 and $30 for pants, tops, zip-ups, things like that. So it can take a little while to sell, but again, it's a brand that I have sold time and time again, and especially if it's a good style and a more recent style or silhouette, it can do pretty well, but it does, again, take a while to sell. Sometimes it's not something that if I list it, I can count on it selling within the next week or two. It can take several months, but it's a brand that I've had enough luck with in the past, or had enough success with, I should say, that I will continue to pick it up. And I also did want to say some categories, like most brands, can definitely sell for more than $30. Categories like dresses, jumpsuits, and more substantial jackets can definitely sell for like $40 to $60, but typically what I find from Urban Outfitters does seem to sell like under $30. All right, next up is Bowden, and this brand actually has never sold for me for more than $20, so it's not a brand that when I find I'm like seeing dollar signs or anything like that. It's a consistent seller, but not a high profit, at least in my experience. And I would guess that newer styles with the newer tag or more substantial pieces, again, more substantial categories, would sell for more, but it is a brand that typically does have a low average sales price for me, and it does take a little while to sell. Okay, next up on the low average sales price, high turnaround time is Show Me Your Moo. This is a brand that typically for me has sold $20 to $25, and I've actually only found it a few times, but they do have some very nice styles, good dresses. I've sold a dress and a pair of shorts. And then let me know if any of you remember selling this or remember seeing this Show Me Your Moo robe. It was a floral robe, and I feel like it was the most saturated thing on Poshmark for a while. So the fact that mine did sell when I found it and listed it was a little bit of a surprise, but I remembered sharing that so long ago, and somebody told me that was in a FabFitFun box. And so anyway, just a funny little thing. Let me know if you remember that. I think that was probably like 2021, and let me know if you sold that robe too, actually. All right, and then lastly, for the low average sales price, high turnaround time brands is Topshop. Topshop for me typically resells $15 to $25. somewhere in there, and it can take a little while to sell, but it does pretty much every time sell eventually. But again, it is a brand that has sat and sat and sat for me. So if you are looking specifically for items that sell fast, I do not recommend being on the lookout for this brand. But if you come across this brand and it's a good item, good style, good condition, all these things, you check comps, there's a good chance it will sell. It's just not necessarily going to sell for a lot, and it might take a little while. And I did actually find out very recently that Topshop closed all its stores down in 2021, and the fast fashion brand ASOS acquired the brand. So I'm curious how that's going to impact the value of the brand. That was already 3 years ago, so you know, who knows what that'll look like, but it is still sold at Nordstrom, so in my opinion, that's probably helping it kind of hold its value at least somewhat. But again, that's a brand that does not sell for a ton. So even if, you know, even if it retails for a lot, it doesn't always resell for a lot. And this is a perfect example of that. All right, next are brands that typically have a high average sales price of about $30 or more and a high turnaround time of 90 days or more. So these are brands that might take a little bit to sell, but at least they do sell typically for a higher average sales price than the brands we just looked at. So the first one is Theory. And this brand, I've come across it a handful of times. I've only picked it up a few times, and it does seem to do pretty well, but again, it does end up taking a while for me, at least, to sell it. Categories like jackets and sweaters can sell pretty well, anywhere from around 30 to 35, probably more too, depending on the materials, depending on the style, things like that. But it does sit for a while typically. Next up is Rag & Bone. So Rag & Bone typically does sell for more than $30 for me, especially for more high quality material items. It's a brand that I know if I pick it up, it might not sell for quite a while. But on the other hand, I have had instances where it does sell a little quicker, so it's not, you know, set in stone. But in my experience, a majority of the time, Rag & Bone does flip for more than $30, but it does take a little while to sell. Things like t-shirts and tank tops by this brand do sell for quite a bit less, maybe only $10 to $15. And again, you might be sitting on it for a while. So for those categories, I personally would probably kind of pass on them or maybe just be more picky. But for more substantial categories, I definitely think it can be a very good, profitable flip. Next on this list is Barefoot Dreams. And this brand is sold at Nordstrom. I don't know where else it's sold, but I know I have seen it at Nordstrom, and it is a pretty, you know, high retail price, anywhere between $100 and $200. It's a very like luxurious loungewear kind of a brand, but I do know that when I pick it up, it might not be a very fast flip, but the material on those robes and cardigans is very nice, and when you feel it when you're thrifting, you can just kind of tell immediately that it's something a little bit nicer. So if you come across this brand, I would make sure it's in good condition, but it's a brand that can definitely do well and flip for a pretty good price. Next is Gentle Herd, and I only actually have one experience selling this brand, but I thought it was a good enough experience to share, and it's a brand that I have been on the lookout for ever since I did find it. So it's a pretty small sample size of only finding this brand one time, but I did think it was still worth mentioning. The one time I found it, it was a pair of joggers that sold for $50 on Poshmark. So I'm definitely on the lookout for that brand because I was pleasantly surprised at how well it sold. And then lastly, for the high average sales price, high turnaround time brands is Diane von Furstenberg. So items by this brand are very hard to come by in my experience. I feel like it is quite rare, at least for me, to come across this brand. When I do, I get excited because it's a brand that does have a pretty high average sales price for me. And it's one of those brands that retails for a lot. Their items typically sell $400, $500, $600, but they don't resell, you know, quite up there. I don't think I've ever sold anything for more than $100 by this brand. I'm sure you could, especially for a newer style, but for me, it's still, you know, a great high sales price at over $30, and you know, they're good high quality pieces, so I think people are on the lookout for them, but it's not necessarily a super fast flip. Again, it probably does depend on the style, how new the item is, the condition, all these factors. But in general, it's a brand that does sell for quite a bit and take a little while to sell. Next up are brands that typically have a low sales price of under $30, but a low turnaround time, so they do at least flip pretty quickly. And the first on this list is Everlane. So this brand actually almost landed in the next category because I've had several instances where it is sold for more than $30. So I did just want to say that it's a brand that almost always sells pretty quickly, not every time, but a majority of the time it does sell within 90 days. And sometimes it is for more than $30 and sometimes it's for less. But a majority of the sales I've had by Everlane have been less than $30. And I did want to mention the items I've sold more recently by Everlane have actually been a lower average sales price than it used to sell for. So when I was taking a look at the prices of items I've sold by this brand, I did notice that it has gone down in value a little bit, and I do think it's just a little bit more saturated, and it could be that I don't always find more substantial materials or higher quality materials like cashmere and wool, but when I do find those items tend to do well. But I think typically it does sell pretty well as long as the item is a more recent style in good condition and not super saturated on Poshmark, eBay, or Mercari. Okay, next up on the list is Wilfred. So Wilfred typically sells, around $15 to $25, somewhere in there, usually under $30 for basics like t-shirts, leggings, and skirts. But more trendy styles or silhouettes can definitely sell for a bit more. So I think it's a brand that I usually come across more of their basics. Next up is Soft Surroundings. So tops and pants have sold for me right around $20 by this brand. And I actually only have experience selling size medium or larger, but I have heard a couple other resellers say that smaller sizes by this brand take a lot longer to sell and sometimes don't sell. So I don't know if I've just not come across extra smaller smalls or just passed on them, but when I was looking at my data, I did notice that I've only ever sold mediums, large, extra large by this brand, so maybe just something to consider. The next brand that typically has a low average sales price and a low turnaround time is Beyond Yoga. So this brand does sell almost every time I've listed it within a couple weeks of being listed, and it sells right around $20 to $30 typically. So it is a brand that I do get excited when I find it, because even though it's not anything super substantially major price-wise or profit-wise, it is a quick flip usually, and I like that the items are higher quality. They just feel really nice. So it's a brand that I kind of personally like, and I do get excited to find it just because it typically does flip very quickly. I did just find at the bins a few days ago a Beyond Yoga waffle knit pullover, so I'm excited to get that listed and see if it flips as quickly as some of the other items that I've found. The last brand that sells for a typically low average sales price and a low turnaround time is Figs, which is a scrubs brand that I think is pretty popular amongst professionals who wear scrubs, because I feel like this brand, although it doesn't sell for much on the resale market, it doesn't even really retail for much. I think it retails around $50 or so for a pair of scrubs pants. So it does flip quickly, but of course it's only, going to sell maybe $15 to $30 or so. And I would just make a note to, if you're going to pick up this brand, to make sure the item is in really good condition, because obviously someone's wearing it to work in a professional setting. It's, they need it to look really clean and nice and in good condition. So I think that if the item is full of stains and not in great condition, I would probably pass on it unless you think you can revive it, but just something to keep in mind. Then lastly are the brands that typically have a high average sales price of around $30 or more, and then a low turnaround time of less than 90 days. So first on this list is Teddy Fresh, and I only have a couple instances of selling this brand, but it is a great brand to be on the lookout for, and especially items like sweatpants and sweatshirts can sell for more than $30, 40 plus dollars really. But I did sell a t-shirt by this brand once that only sold for like 15. So I would be on the lookout for more substantial pieces, but it's a brand I'm on the lookout for, and it does sell pretty quickly and for a high profit, which is the best. Okay, next on the list is Smartwool, and again, a brand I've only found a few times, but I love finding Smartwool because it sells so quickly, sometimes sells within a day, and I've heard from other people that this brand does very well for them as well. They make good like base layer type items, and luckily it does sell pretty quickly and typically for a higher sale price. All right, the next on this list is Patagonia, and for me, Patagonia typically does sell right around $30. Almost every time it seems to sell like right about $30, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on the item, but I love to sell this brand. I do feel like this brand is somewhat easy to come by. It's definitely not necessarily every single time, but I think it's a brand that is out there and, you know, not too hard to find if you have your eye out for it. So I like finding jackets, pullovers, vests, things like that. Obviously more of the outdoor kind of categories versus, you know, tops and shirts and stuff like that. But typically it does sell right around $30 or more, and then vintage items of course will sell for more. And the logo holds so much value in itself, because I just recently sold a Patagonia trucker hat, very basic trucker hat, but it did have the Patagonia logo, and it sold for $30. So it's a brand that people are clearly after and want, and I like that brand, so I get it. But if you find it and it's in good condition, it can definitely be a very quick flip and sell for a pretty good price. Okay, next up is LaFleur, and this is a brand I've only found one time, but I am on the lookout for it. And I think pretty regularly this brand does sell for more than $30 from what I've heard from other people, what I've seen when I check comps, things like that. So it's a kind of hard brand to come by, at least in my experience, but if you find it, look up comps, see, you know, if it's a good item to pick up. But from my one experience selling it, I would grab it again. Yeah, my only experience selling it was a dress that sold for $45, and it took 43 days to sell. So more than $30, under 90 days. And I did check comps before filming this video, and just for that brand on Poshmark, and it very consistently sells for $40 or more. And obviously I can't see on Poshmark how long the item took to sell, but it does seem to flip for a pretty high sale price. And in my one experience, it was a pretty decently quick flip as well. Okay, and then lastly on the list of 20 brands to thrift and sell online is Saison. And this is a brand that I definitely like to find and sell, but it does not happen too often. It is a French brand that specializes in more feminine, kind of elegant silhouettes and pieces. And it's a good day if you find Saison in the bins or at the thrift store. A couple times I've sold it. It has sold for $50 or more both times. Actually, there was a third time. It was a collaboration piece, and it sold, I think, for $30. So in all those cases, though, it did sell in that 30 or more price range, and you know, it's a good brand to be on the lookout for. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please comment down below if there are any brands that you think do not belong on the list or that you would add to the list. You guys have a very good rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video.